Between the two of us, we've had 9 brain injuries. Does anyone know what that means?
It means that it took 2 of us to remember that we had a TEDx presentation today. Today, we will be talking about living with brain injuries, and we will be going into how life was impacted afterward.
Now, brain injuries have lots of long and complicated definitions that we're not going to go into today, but we are going to talk about concussions a little bit. Most simply, a concussion is a brain injury resulting from a blow to the head or body.
It's an extremely broad definition, but what we want you to understand is that a single concussion has the ability to create life-lasting impacts. It can cause severe brain damage and even death. It's unfortunate that in our society, the word concussion is used very nonchalantly.
That's part of the problem with an invisible disability. If you see someone with 2 broken legs, you understand why they're late for work that day, why they need some sort of accommodations. When you see someone with a concussion, you most likely won't know. And a lot of times when they ask for help, people don't believe them.
Concussions are a big issue in our society. Here's a slide demonstrating the amount of concussions that people sustain and living with them afterward. And you can see the number 3.2 million. Now, these numbers are only based on those people that were hospitalized with traumatic brain injuries. And Brandon and I, as we'll go into in a moment, weren't hospitalized. So we fall outside of this number. So you can imagine how fast this number grows with people that are living with permanent disabilities after brain injuries.
Brain injuries are finally getting more recognition through the media with the new NFL protocols and movies and all sorts of other information. It's finally becoming apparent just how common concussions are and how dangerous they can be.
Here's a slide behind us that breaks down the most common causes of brain injuries. Both Brandon and I fall into these categories: falls, motor vehicle accidents, getting struck by or against something, etc.
I got my 4th and 5th concussion during the same football game my junior year of high school. They were about 30 minutes apart, so it qualified as second impact syndrome.
Second impact syndrome is the rapid swelling of the brain, and it's usually caused by 2 or more concussions in a short period of time. The condition is often fatal, and those who don't die from the condition are severely disabled. So when Brandon says he has second impact syndrome, what he doesn't say is that he's lucky to be standing here.
So I saw a doctor a day after I got my concussions, and not his fault, but they looked in my eyes and said, "Oh, you'll be better in a week." A few weeks later, I wasn't better. Then they moved it out to maybe a year, maybe 2 years, then probably never.
My story isn't nearly as dramatic as Brandon's. In fact, I got my concussions in some of the most common ways that you can: a horseback riding accident, a car accident, a bicycle accident, and the most ridiculous of all was walking in a ditch.
And when she says walking in a ditch, she doesn't mean like she fell down into a ditch. She means she was walking and missed a step and shook her head just a little too much.
But it is no second impact syndrome, Brandon. But these seemingly small concussions were still enough to drastically alter the future of my life.
It doesn't take long to realize that, yes, these concussions cause issues, and all brain injuries are vastly different. The 2 things brain injuries have in common are everyone has cognitive issues, and then everyone has what's called brain energy issues. We'll go into that a little later. But cognitive issues, at least for me, look like me having trouble in a conversation. If I'm having a conversation with someone, it's hard for me to remember where it started, where it's going, what they said, what I'm supposed to say back. I get mixed up and start to stutter, and it's not a fun experience.
There's a bit of a range where, on one hand, people who have concussions, they might have very little symptoms, or they don't really have any issues and they rebound right away after their injuries. And on the other hand, you have severe disabilities, changes that last forever. Maybe they're mental, maybe they're physical. It could be depression, anxiety. You might have a limp, a stutter, a twitch, chronic fatigue, or headaches. There's a theory that we like to discuss when talking about this, and along with cognition, I struggled with reading comprehension issues and memory, but one of the hardest things to work through was energy. The spoon theory is by Christine Miserandino, and you can look up her theory. It's a wonderful, wonderful discussion about invisible disabilities, but basically it equates spoons to energy. And every day, every person starts with a certain number of spoons. And each activity that you do through the day costs a certain number of spoons. So before my brain injuries, I might have had 80 or 90 or 100 spoons to start with in the day. And after each activity in the day, I would lose a certain number of spoons. But after the brain injury, I might start with 15 or 20 or 10 spoons in a day. And if eating breakfast costs 1 spoon, you can quickly see how 1/10 of my energy is gone by the time I walk out the door. this is a major issue when we're talking about brain injuries.
It's easy to see how little changes like this would vastly change our identities. I mean, we all have gone through life. Our identities change from things like growing up or going to college or starting a new job. But for us, it wasn't a natural progression. One day, we were forced to change, and ever since then, we've just been trying to catch up and figure out who we are now.
It's the little things you'd never think make the difference. When somebody hears about something I might be going through, a common thing I hear is, oh, that happens to me all the time. You don't have to have a brain injury to experience that. And while that is true, you don't have to have a brain injury to fail an exam or forget your lines in a TEDx presentation. It still is, it's the change. We don't think we're special or different or that nobody else goes through these things. It's the difference from then to now, that we didn't have these problems before and now we do.
It's weird to wake up one day and realize you can't do something you've never thought about even doing, like walking or talking. That was just natural, and now it's not. It's really hard to accept and advocate for yourself that these are different and you need something different.
The acceptance piece is one of the slowest and hardest parts of this program, or progress. I had a really hard time with this because I was told when I went to the ER for my second concussion, the car accident, that I had post-concussive syndrome, and I was given a note that said, you may have memory loss and problems taking exams. So I didn't really think anything of it. And when I started failing classes, as a straight-A student before, some red flags came up, but I wasn't too concerned because I had had a really hard semester. So the next semester in the fall, when I went back to school and I started failing again, I realized that something is really wrong, and I took the first step to tell my parents about my poor grades, which was terrifying. And it was then, in that moment, that I realized it wasn't just my grades that had changed, it was my whole life. My personality had changed. I didn't laugh at the same jokes. I didn't really like hanging out with my friends. It was exhausting. I didn't want to be out in society anymore.
For me, the road to understanding why I was having these issues was a little simpler because they started literally the day after I got hit in the head. I was able to put two and two together and figure that one out. It was hard for me to accept, though, that I was having these changes. I kept being told that if I just wait a little longer, I'll be better. So I didn't really accept that, okay, I have a brain injury. I just said, next week, maybe I'll be better. But after a couple years, a doctor finally told me that, you know what, it's time to stop treating the brain injury and start learning to live with it. In that moment, it was devastating to hear. But looking back, it was so important because I was able to finally accept that I had a brain injury. This will affect me the rest of my life, and I started advocating for myself.
So what do we do now? We start to see these changes, and then we start to accept that these changes might be permanent. And then what? What's the next step? For those of you who are wondering what the superpower is, you cannot fly. That is not a thing. But you can advocate. And it's a really uncomfortable thing to do at first. It's not really exactly good etiquette to walk up to someone and say, hey, my name is Lauren, and I love cows, and I got 4 brain injuries. What's your name again? And it's awkward. It's really uncomfortable to kind of adopt a new part of yourself and then try to insert it into all these facets of life. And there's a point where you realize that you have certain needs that can't be met in a traditional way, and that's when you start the journey to self-advocacy.
And self-advocacy is not the funnest process. No one looks forward to the first day of class or first day on a new job, going up to your boss and saying, hey, I have a brain injury and I need these accommodations to be successful. No one wants to be the oddball. Most people, at least in the start of brain injuries, at least me, I just pretend nothing's wrong, not bring it up, and it really hurt my success.
I learned this issue the hard way. I was almost done with college in my second to last semester. I was taking a neuro class. And among the normal college student stresses, I had post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, a host of sensory and stimulation issues. And the icing on the cake was I had just managed to break my foot in 5 places.
Now, brain injuries do cause motor skill difficulties, but Lauren's just accident-prone.
So I crutched into my final exam, and I took it in a room by myself. It was part of my accommodations. And about an hour into the exam, I had barely touched it. I was bawling. My foot was on the table because it hurt. I was covered in tissues, and my professor came up to me, and she checked on me, and she did something that I never expected. She sat with me. She asked me how I was doing. She talked about my life. And then she asked me if I would like to have the exam read to me. That change was monumental. Not only, if I had just gone up to her and asked her and told her what my needs were, not only would she have been able to help me with that, but she would have given me tools to be my most successful self. That's when I realized that you can't be complacent. And I started to change aspects in my life so that I could advocate and then accept the outcomes of the advocacy.
With the help from the CSU Occupational Therapy Department, Laura and I developed a group called the CSU Brain Injury Community. Now, the goal of this group is to bring students with brain injuries together to show them that, yes, this can be normal. You are not alone, and it's okay to ask for your needs. You're not the odd man out here. We all deserve the chance to be the most successful as we can.
So, with a dream of bringing people together and a whole lot of rescheduled meetings, we were able to start CBIC. Brandon and I laugh a lot, mostly because we are hilarious, but also because it's a way for us to cope. We realize that brain injury isn't a laughing matter, and that not everybody can laugh about it. But unknowingly, when we started this organization, we took a deeply personal and hurtful experience, and we made a little room for laughter. It's that laughing, it's the place where we all come together, and even though none of our stories are the same, we all share parallel experiences.
It's amazing how crazy and isolated you feel having a disability that no one can see and no one else you know has it. You just start to wonder if you're making this up. Is this really happening in your life? But then it took me 4 years to meet Lauren, who was the first person that really had a similar situation to mine. And it was just eye-opening, understanding that, no, I'm not alone, and other people go through this as well. Just knowing one person that went through it with me it helped me open up to everybody and be able to advocate for all my needs.
When you look normal, it's hard to accept that things really aren't normal up here. And that's part of the process of growth and how we moved from self-advocacy to advocating for others. We realize in this process that we're not alone. It's not just brain injuries that people struggle with this. So we'd like to do a little activity. Get prepared to engage. Would you please raise your hands and keep them raised if you've ever had a concussion? How about if you know somebody with a brain injury? How about if you know someone with post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, fatigue, asthma, Crohn's, eosinophilic esophagitis, Meniere's, MS, the list goes on and on. Look around. Almost all of you had your hands raised. This is a big issue, and if you didn't raise your hand, you're lucky. It's estimated 1 in 5 Americans live with an invisible disability of some type, and the hard thing is they live in shame, or they don't know how to speak up. They don't know how to tell people what their needs are, and they need an audience who's willing to hear what they have to say.
Unfortunately, there's no easy equation for how to normalize advocacy around the country. But there are a few things that we've learned over the years that at least help get us started. First of all, is people need to be willing to have a discussion about it. If everyone's either too ashamed or too uncomfortable to talk about it, no ground's going to be made whatsoever. And secondly, people need to understand advocacy isn't about asking for charity. It's saying how I will be most successful in the given situation. I don't want to be given free things at a job, but I want the job to give me data in the best way possible so I can give the most back to the company.
Brain injuries may have modified our dreams, but it doesn't make us any less able to dream. And we did something a little bit sneaky. There's actually a second superpower that you all possess that we did not tell you about. It's the power to see invisibility. Not with your eyes, but with your hearts. Let's embrace a childlike perspective and give people the benefit of the doubt. In a world where we demand proof and evidence so that we know things are the way they're supposed to be, let's accept the fact that maybe we aren't given an apparent evidence for somebody's condition. Living with brain injuries not only taught us the power of advocacy, but it opened our eyes to the invisible world that we live in.
I know we got a little serious, so let's end on a joke. How do people with brain injuries say hello?
They say, "What's your name again?"
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.